Hello and welcome to my APUS notes video for chapter 24, The Radiant Empire from 1865 to 1970. And as you can tell by the badly drawn Darth Vader mask, this is going to be about imperialism. Before I begin, I'm going to want to point out as this video is going to be extremely biased towards the people being imperialized, and as you can tell by my jacket, I have my own reasons for this bias, and I just want to point it out again. So, the American reasons for expansion were largely found in their economics, as in the case of the Philippines, which was imperialized open Asian market way for trade and cash crops, and Panama for easier transportation. First, it's important to ask what is imperialism. It's hard to define, but basically, imperialism is the act of a strong nation exerting control over a weaker nation, politically or militarily, in order to extract resources, or use it for military advantage, or in some cases, because it is there. Now, the rationales of imperialism differ, but in America, they were basically social determinism, righteousness, which, as you could probably guess, largely involved missionaries, um, Mahanism, sorry, I can't pronounce it too well, which was pretty well backed up by prominent American politicians like Teddy Roosevelt, who himself was a huge imperialist, as you'll see later, and Henry Cabot Lodge, and basic economics, which basically they want to take resources from the country being imperialized. So, American imperialism really began with the actions of Secretaries of State Stewart and so Ford. He was actually a large failure in terms of imperialism, but he did manage to acquire Alaska and the Midway Islands, and also further the opening of Japan for trade, which he would probably later regret. And for Blaine, he was more successful. Um, he exerted control over Latin America by initiating the First International American Conference, which created the Pan American Union, which was basically an alliance dominated by the United States over Latin American nations, dictating policy Europeans, with Europeans, with Europeans, and such. And he largely ignored the fact that the scramble for Africa was going on between the European nations. This is a good example of isolationist policy because the United States almost completely ignored the actions of Europeans in Africa. So let's begin in my home islands of Hawaii. I compare American presence in the islands to cancer, particularly because it started out small and relatively benign, but it just grew and grew and grew and sucked energy and power out of one monarchy and eventually took over. So they originally arrived Americans originally arrived mostly as permanently as missionaries and then as planters, probably to grow from the volcanic soil, from extremely fertile volcanic soil. This opened up U.S. interest in trade, sugar plantations, and the fact that Hawaii is a midway point between the American coastline and uh, Asia, as well as being home to several ports. So they, in the 1880s, they forced King Kalakaua to sign the Bayonet Constitution, which limited when monarchical power in the kingdom, and then when the Queen Leopoldani, after Kalakaua's death, took a harder stance on foreigners, they decided to start and take over Hawaii for American annexation. So let's go to Latin America. Starting with Chile, there not much happens in terms of imperialism in Chile. It was mostly policy, but there was always kind of a frosty relationship between the Americans and the Chileans. This was kind of exerted through a large brawl that occurred between a bunch of American sailors and Chileans, in which 2 Americans were killed, 17 were injured, and dozens were in prison. This angered the American public, and it just worsened Chilean-American relations. And the fact that the United States decided to back up the losing side of a revolution kind of further darkened them in the eyes of made Chileans. And eventually, the U.S. passed an ultimatum that either the Chileans back down on the anti-American policies and sentiments, or the Americans will come in, and guess what happened? Now, actually Venezuela are an interesting case because they weren't primarily against Venezuelans. They were against British interests in Latin America, which kind of follows the Monroe Doctrine. But by this time, the Monroe Doctrine was mostly self-serving for Americans, and it basically just allowed the United States to stand up to the United Kingdom and watch as the United Kingdom actually backed down from American force. The major example of American imperialism is the Spanish-American War. So the causes of it are the harsh crackdown of Cubans and Cuban, especially revolutionaries, by the Spanish, which led to pro-Cuban sentiments in the United States and a large amount of sympathy. This was kind of exacerbated by fantastical news reports called Yellow Press that were made by several newspaper companies that romanticized the suffering of Cubans. There's also a religious cause behind this, with the fact that most Spanish were Catholic, are Catholic, and the fact that at the time the United States was a largely Protestant nation. And also, by that time, there were low diplomatic relations between the United States and Spain, and the events that several events that are like the explosion on the USS Maine just exacerbated this. So the first target that the Americans hit in the Spanish-American War was the Philippines, and at the time, like Cuba, the Philippines were already in revolt, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, who proclaimed the first Philippine Republic. The Battle of Manila Bay was the main action that was seen. It was basically Commodore Dewey coming in from British-controlled Hong Kong and utterly annihilating the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. And also at that time, Aguinaldo's rebels had control of much of Luzon from British control of much of Luzon from the Spanish. But even though the United States offered their aid and gave their aid essentially to the Filipinos, they went back on their word and annexed, not really annexed, but the Philippines became imperialized by the United States, and this led to the Philippine-American War. United States basically had an easy time defeating Spanish forces in Cuba. And in Puerto Rico, there wasn't much action besides the beyond famous Battle of San Juan Hill. It's notable mostly because of the it's been highly romanticized because of the gallant military action there, notably by the rough riders who were conglomerates of Cowboys and English and everyone in between, put together by Teddy Roosevelt. But what's often ignored is the heroism and bravery shown by the black soldiers, who were stationed in cavalry units at the time, the 9th and the 10th Negro Cavalry. And they're cited to have shown great bravery, gallantness under fire, with a great calm, but most of the credit in the point of the Rough Riders. The thing about the Spanish-American War is that the soldiers that fought in it were extremely ill-trained, ill-equipped. They were issued uniforms for fighting in the tropics, and the vast majority of casualties were caused by disease instead of KIA. The peace settlement for the Spanish-American War, the Treaty of Paris, basically gave the United States rights to Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, as well as the influence over Cuba. It heavily influenced future foreign policy, especially in the Philippines with the advent of the Philippine-American War, and the fact that the United States now had a global empire. And this was the Treaty of Paris was heavily opposed in the United States by the anti-imperialist League, which had some pretty prominent members like Andrew Carnegie and Mark Twain, as well as the Black Men's Burden Association, which was an association primarily of African Americans against imperialism. After the Spanish-American War, there are several examples of American interference in Asia, like the Philippine-American War I mentioned before. People consider it to be America's first Vietnam situation because it was also in Southeast Asia, and not against a standing army, but against large amounts of guerrillas with the support of the peasantry and most of the populace. It's famous for being marked with horrible atrocities committed by both sides, mainly by Americans on Filipinos. There are reports of huge massacres, and this led to independence. It probably wouldn't have happened at the time anyway, but independence didn't happen until 1946. The open door policy is mostly economic expansion because of competition in trade in China between the United States, European powers, and the Japanese. So it basically was solidified by the U.S. involvement in the Boxer Rebellion, and it just kept China open to U.S. trade. And the story of Russia, Japan, and the United States is interesting because it started out with the Russo-Japanese War, which was supported by the Americans, and it led to the Japanese capture of Manchuria, or most part of Manchuria, Korea, and bits of Russian territory. It was basically the annihilation of the Russians by the Japanese, and it actually worsened the mediation of the war by Roosevelt. Actually worsened tensions between the Americans and the Japanese, especially because of edicts by the public school board in San Francisco that Asian children are segregated from Americans. That led to issues, and so there wouldn't be war. There was the gentleman's agreement between the United States and Japan that basically said Japanese immigration to the United States or controlled territories, and it stopped discrimination against Japanese. Lastly, there are several examples of incursions into Latin America by Americans, by the United States. There are several examples like attacks in occupation of Nicaragua, occupation of Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. But the main ones are in Puerto Rico, Cuba, Panama, and Mexico. Puerto Rico and Cuba, which were acquired during the Spanish-American War, as I said before, in both cases, their infrastructure was improved by the Americans, but they were also extremely impoverished and had very little rights. In the case of the Panama Canal, it's interesting because it was mostly off of trade rights, and the way that the Panama Canal was captured was the use of Panamanian rebels against the Colombians, basically playing them against each other, and using the disorder to come with gunboats, seal off the Colombian troops, and make a deal with the Panamanian rebels to keep the Panama Canal. And in Mexico, as most of you already know, there's U.S. intervention on the side of, at first, the rebels, and we were fighting the rebels and supporting the government until, and then Pancho Villa came in and terrorized the southwest of the United States until we came in and tried to capture Pancho Villa. So that's your list for you in 17 minutes and about 30 seconds. I want to end with a poem that's a reply to The White Man's Burden, called The Brown Man's Burden by Henry Labouchere, I believe. And it kind of summed up the views of imperialism by the imperialists. By along the brown man's burden to verify your greed, clear away the neighbors, who progress would impede. He's very stern for truly, 'tis useless to be mild, with new sullen peoples, half devil and half child. All brown man's burden, and if you rouse the state, need his old fiendish reasons with maxims to date, with shells and bullets, 100 times made plain, the brown man's loss must never imply the white man's gain. Thank you. And remember, don't forget to be awesome.